I have this mic on. I hope you can hear me better. You can. Good. Very good. The reading this morning is from the National President of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Sophia Betancourt. Beloveds, in these fearful and difficult days, I send my love and solidarity to each of you and your families, communities, and organizing networks. As the executive orders roll out, we are witnessing an attempted unraveling of decades of work for a fair and free nation. As Unitarian Universalists, we are personally, theologically, and covenantally bound together by the expansive love that has always been the animating center of our faith. Far more powerful than any faction, leader, nation, or creed, it is this fierce love that compels our deepest loyalty and our most courageous action. I join you in meeting the days and years to come with faith and renewed purpose. To look at me, you would never guess that I'm a member of a minority group. But within Unitarian Universalism and within this congregation, I am. I don't feel oppressed, but I do feel different. How? Well, I was born Unitarian Universalist, raised Unitarian Universalist, third generation, in fact. If I look out here, I can count on one hand. There were other members of those minority groups, that minority group. I have no salvation story. I didn't walk into a Unitarian Universalist church one day and say, I have found my people. Or lost the script. I didn't say, this is where I belong. I didn't make that choice. Prior generations made it for me. My only choice was to stay. Of course, that wasn't easy, at least not always. When I was going to Unitarian Universalist Sunday School, the Bible was an important part of the curriculum. It wasn't taught as a sacred book or the Word of God. It was taught as a series of stories that taught us about the human condition and how we might respond to that condition. For instance, we had a book about Jesus entitled Jesus, the Carpenter's Son. And of course, the New Testament is full of admonitions to love your neighbor and had many stories to reinforce that virtue, among many others. I was far more drawn to the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. There were the characters. It's full of characters. Abraham, Eve, Moses, Job, Miriam, Sarah, Jacob, Joseph. It's a long, long list. There were the prophets issuing solemn warnings. Forswear thy foolish ways. There was the golden calf, created to give an illusion of certainty in an uncertain time. There were great and flawed figures, often directly arguing, and at least in one case, wrestling with God. There was the flood and the promise that came afterward. The people of God were seeking justice, and especially community and common purpose. but they were also sinful and rebellious. They had their ups and downs, their moments when they lost faith and hope, but then something good would happen that restored their sense of purpose and vision for a bright future. They could keep on keeping on. When the Puritans came over here, they thought they were, like the Hebrews, leaving Egypt and establishing a new place. In their case, they were leaving England, but it was the same basic idea. And they came over here, and suddenly they had nothing to rebel against. They were conquering the natives, but they had nothing, in their minds, they had nothing to rebel against here. So they had to figure out, how will we organize our churches? Brand new experience. They knew what they were against. They didn't know exactly what they were for. So they gathered together and prepared. They are, of course, as you may know, the antecedents, our original forebears. They gathered together and prepared what is the founding document of Unitarian Universalism, and also, by the way, of the Congregationalists, of whom we were once a part. That document is the Cambridge Platform of 1648, a long time ago, and I can tell from your faces, few of you have studied it closely. While it talked about theology, its most important feature was polity, how we could organize together. In The American Creed, a book by Forrest Church, he paraphrases the covenant that they agreed to as we pledge to walk together in the ways of truth and affection, as best we know how. May we learn in the days to come that we and our children may be fulfilled, and that we may speak to the world in words and actions of peace and goodwill. A simple promise to walk together in the ways of mutual commitment and affection. It said that each individual congregation determines its own fate, including selecting its own minister. It stressed independence, but it also stressed interdependence, as did the Hebrew Bible itself in its many stories of working together under both difficult and hopeful circumstances. Interdependence meant that congregations banded together to do those tasks no individual congregation could get done, to help each other when help was needed, to make certain that ministers were trained and monitored for quality, among many other tasks. So in that Cambridge platform, we moved from I believe, and that being it, to we promise to each other. I believe, but we promise to each other. As I matured and entered congregational life, with many organizational life, with many organizations over many decades, it's those stories of the Hebrew Bible that taught me humility and patience. Lots of patience. We have analogous stories in this congregation. Organizations emerge, they struggle, they grow, they experience setbacks, the people rise to the occasion, the people disappoint. We experience despair, we reach for hope. That's what life is about, and that, as you may know, is also the life of our own congregation on this tip of Cape Cod. There are many ghosts in this room, ghosts of our past who also are our present, In the early decades, many of them were lay volunteers. Everyone pitches in and gets what needs to get done. Everyone complains that there aren't enough people to get it done. But somehow, it happens. When I first visited this congregation, I met one of those ghosts here, David Nash Williams, our first settled minister. What courage it took in 1989 to decide to have a full-time minister and risk being able to afford that minister. We had been on our own, or so we thought, for 30 years, but we knew something was missing. Several other clergy had already preceded him. Ken Warren, the minister in Barnstable, was essentially the big brother, the mentor to the congregation in the 60s and 70s. And Bill Gardner, a retired UU minister who was a member of this congregation, was essentially the minister when needed in the 1980s. Another ghost, still very present in spirit but in body in Florida, is our second settled minister, Bob Murphy. For many of you, that is why you first joined this congregation. You remember him. We have had only 3 settled ministers in the 36 years we have had ministers, which is a remarkable statement of our loyalty and of the loyalty of those ministers. We also have a long-standing tradition of generosity. This building, constructed 6 years after we called our first minister, is testament to that generosity and the spirit of promise and hope of the leaders at that point in time, one of whom was Tom Kirkman, among many others. Our first staff, a religious educator, was a testament to that generosity. Improving and maintaining this building over the decade, the building itself, the HVAC system just a few years back, parking lots, solar panels, pianos, all speak to our generosity. Now, there were many shocks in the pandemic. That we could no longer gather in person was the biggest one. But then there came another shock. The chair of the Finance Committee reporting that we could not afford a full-time minister anymore. For over 30 years we could, but now we could not. But people rise to meet when they see a crisis, and our fundraising rose like a phoenix. We had 2 pledge drives that each broke the previous record for a pledge drive in the history of the congregation, each one beating the one before. We searched for and hired a half-time contract minister who has given us a tantalizing taste, a reminder of what ministry has and can mean for us. We still don't think we have enough money. So our upcoming fund drive is even more important than the last 2 years. Can we do it? Yes, of course. We can exceed even our last 2 years of extraordinary generosity, because in this congregation, we support each other in good times and bad times. When we need to do so, we rise to the occasion. This is one of those times, and like Jack Mulkeen, I believe we can do it. It won't be someone else who will show generosity and make it happen. It will be you and me who will make it happen. Generosity is not only a spiritual practice, it is the spiritual practice. We show generosity all the time, and it gives us sustenance and the courage to go on. You give to everyone and you get returns beyond your expectation. Now that's what we have to do this time. The drive isn't about paying bills. It's about fulfilling the promise of what we can be as a community of faith. Now, assuming we raise this money, what will we do next? As you know, we have in place a half-time contract minister. We have come to love her and she us. We are blessed. God is good. But a settled ministry, as we've had 3 times, is different than a half-time contract ministry. So we need to go through a deeply spiritual discernment process, and so does she, about whether she is the right person to be that settled minister. The distinction between a contract minister and a settled called minister lies in the nature of the relationship between the congregation and that minister. It's the relationship, and it's the process of the selection, and it's the expected duration of their service. A contract minister is hired by the governing board under a contractual agreement with a list of a set of duties and for a finite period of time. A settled minister is chosen through a congregation-wide discernment process that concludes with a congregational vote. The congregation and the minister make promises to each other that transcend a mere contract. A list of duties is less important than a caring for the overall welfare of the congregation, and it to the welfare of its minister. The congregation and minister agree to serve each other for an indefinite period of time. A contract ministry is transactional. You're making a deal. A called minister's relationship is covenantal, long-term, grounded in mutual trust, shared values, and a commitment to the congregation's mission. So our governing board has endorsed a contract to call process, a practice endorsed by the UUA for congregations in our situation, and increasing in frequency throughout our association of congregations. It is a process by which we decide whether or not to call our contract minister to settled ministry, and our minister decides whether she agrees to serve in that new, deeper relationship. There are several reasons why this is good for us at this time. First, other candidates will be hesitant to apply because there's an obvious inside candidate. Second, there's a shortage right now of ministers interested in going into parish ministry. There are plenty of ministers out there. They're serving as chaplains and in many other roles. But you'll be surprised to hear it's not easy serving a congregation. It's not easy. Third, candidates will just, as you well could understand, will be discouraged by the cost of housing in this part of the area. When we did the search that found our contract minister, all 3 of those issues were a significant part of the challenge of finding a person to do it. So that process depends, as I mentioned before, on an even more successful act of generosity from you and from me. The generosity is key. Not only does a full-time ministry depend on the fund drive, but the contract to call process and the fund drive will be integrated together. The leadership gatherings and canvas conversations that are part of the fund drive anyway, have been for the last year or two, will serve as visioning conversations this year. We will ask ourselves questions such as, what does the congregation mean to me? A standard Canvas question. What are the current and future needs and opportunities to be faced by the congregation to serve out its mission? That's broader and more visionary than the 3-year plan that would continue on. The 3-year plan is a plan, not a vision. And what are the skills, attributes, and qualifications needed for a minister at this point? And at the same time that this is going on, the minister is going through a process, a discernment process. The candidate will meet with groups of her choosing to engage in conversation based on her own sense of opportunities and challenges in the congregation, and will share hopes, concerns, and questions that are on her mind and in her heart. In early April, the fund drive will wrap up. We will have risen to the occasion. At that point, and only at that point, the board will decide whether and when we can proceed with full-time ministry. Then it comes to the congregation votes, and the minister decides, our current minister, decides whether she wishes to enter into settled ministry with us. If both answers are in the affirmative, a big celebration will take place. The vision for our fund drive is full-time ministry. So you may recall I mentioned the Hebrew Bible. Remember that? The Hebrew Bible. All those stories. Well, we have approached the walls of Jericho. We are making noise. We are blowing our trumpets. The walls are shaking. Now we will make the walls come tumbling down. Hallelujah.